The photograph survived floods, fires, hands that trembled, hands that hid. Two boys stand gripping each other, knuckles tight, eyes wrong. Not childhood wrong, survival wrong. Something in that room refused to stay buried. At first, the hands look protective. Older brother instinct. Younger brother obedience. But the grip isn't gentle. It's containment. A silent order passed through skin. Stay still. Don't breathe wrong. Don't look back. Restoration peeled away time like old scabs. Brick bled through shadow. Iron surfaced. The room wasn't a studio. It was a holding space. And the boys weren't posing. They were waiting for permission to keep living. The worst part isn't what appeared. It's what was already there, watching, patient, just outside the frame. Whoever stood behind that lens didn't want memory. He wanted proof. If you feel that pressure in your chest right now, stay with it. This isn't a story you rush. It unfolds slowly, like truth usually does. Subscribe if you want the full investigation, from photograph to silence to what history tried to erase. The photograph doesn't announce itself. It waits. Two brothers stand close, hands locked. Not affection, not comfort. The grip is rigid, tendons screaming through skin, like one body anchoring another against disappearance. At first glance, it passes for discipline. Older brother steadying a younger one. But something leaks through the stillness. The air feels tight. The silence feels supervised. Even the dust seems careful not to move. Restoration begins like surgery. Layer by layer, time scraped away. Stains retreat. Cracks sharpen. And the first thing that surfaces isn't faces. It's tension. The kind you feel before a door closes behind you. The older brother's shoulders are raised, not relaxed. A defensive posture. Instinctive. As if bracing for impact that hasn't arrived yet. Or has arrived so many times his body no longer waits. The younger brother doesn't lean in. He hangs. Weight transferred fully into that grip. Not trust. Dependence forged under pressure. The kind learned fast, learned young, learned because failure wasn't survivable. Eyes matter in old photographs. Exposure times were long. Expressions blurred into neutrality. But these eyes cut through time sharp. One searching sideways. One empty, already gone somewhere safer. There's a contradiction that doesn't resolve. The older brother looks alert, hyper-present. The younger looks absent, unplugged. Two survival strategies sharing one frame. Both wrong for childhood. Both necessary here. The grip becomes the symbol. Fingers wrapped too tightly. Knuckles pale. This isn't a pose suggested by a photographer. This is a command enforced by consequence. Hold him. Don't let go. Or else. When contrast increases, the background refuses to stay abstract. Texture emerges. Stone instead of cloth. Irregular, unforgiving. This wasn't a studio backdrop borrowed for the day. This was a room with history. The wall carries weight. Old weight. The kind that absorbs sound. You can almost hear it swallowing voices, swallowing names. A place built not for living, but for keeping things from escaping. There's a moment during restoration where the image fights back. Shadows resist clarification. As if the photograph itself understands exposure means accusation. As if it knows what revealing the room will cost. Iron appears slowly. Not all at once. A curve here. A line there. The suggestion of hardware where no hardware should exist. Mounted too low. Positioned too deliberately. Measured for small bodies. The realization doesn't land clean. It stutters. Your mind tries alternatives. Storage hooks. Tools. Anything ordinary. But the spacing is wrong. The wear is wrong. This iron was touched. Often, the brothers aren't centered accidentally. They're placed between those points. As if recently moved. As if the room remembers where they usually stand. As if the photograph interrupted a routine. The older brother's jaw is clenched. You can see it even through damage. Muscles locked hard enough to cast shadows. A decision happening internally. Endure. Protect. Don't provoke what's behind the lens. The younger brother's mouth hangs slightly open. Not fear. Not surprise. Absence. A mind somewhere else entirely. This isn't ignorance. This is withdrawal refined by repetition. There's an unspoken tension in the space between them and the camera. Something directional. Authority flowing one way. You feel it without seeing it. The way prey feels eyes before sound. At higher magnification, reflections betray silhouettes. A tall male shape. Upright. Unhurried. Holding something long, narrow. Not decorative. Functional. The kind of object that ends hesitation quickly. The older brother's gaze drifts toward that direction, just barely. Not enough to be obvious. Enough to be honest. A glance that asks a question he already knows the answer to. The photograph stops being about the boys. It becomes about the man they're responding to. His patience, his control, his need to record this moment, not for memory, but for possession. Hands don't lie. The older brother's thumb presses into the younger's wrist, grounding him. A silent instruction passed through bone. Stay. Survive this second. I've got you. For now. There's a sensory memory buried here. The smell of damp stone. Cold seeping upward through thin soles. Iron tasting the air. Light that doesn't belong to the sun. When the floor sharpens, stains emerge. Irregular. Dark. Old. The kind that never fully lifts. You don't need explanation. Your body already understands prolonged presence happened here. This wasn't a moment stolen quickly. Equipment was set. Light arranged. Time taken. Whoever stood behind the camera felt no urgency. Confidence like that only grows where consequences don't exist. The grip tightens again in your mind. Replays. Becomes heavier. That hand wasn't just holding a brother. It was holding a line against something unnamed, but very close. Names appear later, written by someone else, years after. But in this moment, names don't matter. What matters is function. One brother shielding. One brother enduring. Both trapped. There's a quiet shock realizing the photograph worked exactly as intended. It hid truth behind familiarity. Brothers holding hands. Nothing to see. Move along. Evil survives best when it looks ordinary. As the restoration completes, the image feels less restored than exposed. Like lifting floorboards and finding breath beneath. The room exhales. The photograph finally tells on its owner. And still, the most disturbing part remains untouched. This image wasn't meant to stay. It was meant to travel, to be seen by others who understood exactly what that grip meant. The background stops pretending to be nothing. What once passed as darkness stiffens into surface. Stone replaces shadow. Uneven, scarred, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. This room wasn't meant to flatter faces. Walls like that keep secrets by design. Sound dies early. Breath doesn't travel far. You feel it immediately, even through an image. A place where noise learned it was safer to disappear. As restoration deepens, perspective sharpens. The boys aren't standing in front of something. They're standing inside something. Contained by thickness, by age, by intention baked into architecture. Iron returns, clearer now. Not random hardware. Anchored brackets. Heavy. Fixed with purpose. Positioned where arms would naturally fall if raised and surrendered. The geometry tells its own quiet story. There's wear on the metal. Not neglect. Use. Polished by friction, darkened by contact. Iron remembers touch longer than skin does. It keeps count when people stop. The spacing matters. Too precise for storage. Too low for adults. This room was calibrated. Someone measured height. Someone imagined bodies before they arrived. Between the brackets, the stone is smoother. Rubbed down over time. Shoulders shifting. Heads leaning back. Weighting taut into muscle memory. The wall learned the shape of them. Light doesn't enter naturally. The windows near the ceiling are blocked, sealed, or simply ignored by the sun. Illumination here is controlled. Switched on when needed. Switched off when finished. That kind of light creates obedience. It teaches time differently. Days blur. Minutes stretch. You stop counting because counting doesn't change anything. Near the floor, darkness gathers unnaturally. Stains surface where no stains should be. Irregular shapes. Old spills absorbed and never forgiven. Stone doesn't forget what it's fed. A bucket sits just inside the frame. Metal again. Practical. Degrading. Placed where movement is allowed and nowhere else. The room dictates dignity, then removes it methodically. In one corner, something soft tries to exist. Straw. A thin mattress. Not comfort. Compliance. Enough rest to keep bodies functional. Not enough to let minds wander. This isn't chaos. It's system. Everything positioned to reduce resistance. Space engineered to make people small without touching them. The photograph captures the room mid-performance. Recently reset. The boys likely stood elsewhere moments before. The iron and used only temporarily. Like a pause, not an ending. You can feel the temperature through the image. Cold that climbs upward. Seeps into joints. Makes stillness easier than movement. The room works with the cold, not against it. There's an internal contradiction watching this emerge. Part of you wants the room to be old, abandoned, misinterpreted. Another part recognizes intention immediately. One always wins. This space wasn't borrowed. It was owned. Someone invested in it. Someone returned here often enough to justify preparation. Basements are meant to store things. This one stored time. Stole it. Stacked days on top of each other until boys forgot what outside sounded like. The camera angle confirms it. Slightly low. Respectful of the room, not the subjects. The lens acknowledges the space as dominant, as if asking permission to operate within it. That choice reveals familiarity. You don't frame a place like this unless you've stood there calmly before. Unless fear belongs to others, not you. The boys are centered because the room wants them centered. Everything here funnels attention inward. No distractions. No escape routes. Just presence under watch. The stone behind them carries faint markings. Scratches. Lines not made by tools. Made by waiting hands. Counting days by accident. At full enhancement, the room stops being historical. It becomes immediate. You recognize it instinctively. Every controlled space shares a blueprint. There's a moment of silent shock realizing how much effort went into hiding this in plain sight. A photograph labeled family. A room disguised as background. The investigation turns here. From who the boys are to where they are. Because rooms like this don't exist alone. They belong to men who build them. And men who build rooms like this don't stop with one pair of hands. They refine. They repeat. They share methods. The photograph wasn't taken despite the room. It was taken because of it. Proof that the space worked. That it held. Once you see the room, you can't unsee it. It follows you out of the image. Into hallways. Into other basements that suddenly feel wrong. This is where the story tightens. Because rooms leave records. Purchases. Modifications. Paper trails men assume no one will follow. The room is no longer silent. It's pointing outward now. Toward names. Toward protection. Toward the kind of authority that keeps stone walls unquestioned for decades. And somewhere beyond the frame, someone else has already seen this image and understood exactly what kind of room it was. The photograph doesn't accuse loudly. It doesn't need to. It waits for records, for testimony, for men who were paid to notice and chose not to. Silence leaves fingerprints too. Missing boys were not rare then. Vanishing was easier when streets were crowded and records thin. But this disappearance didn't dissolve quietly. Names were spoken. Doors were knocked. Someone heard something. Witnesses described a man lingering too long. Watching. Well-dressed. Confident. Carrying equipment that suggested skill, not labor. He didn't rush. He didn't hide. Men like that never think they have to. A wagon was noted. A number written down. A lead handed directly to authority. The kind of detail investigators pray for. The kind that shortens timelines and saves lives. It went nowhere. Paperwork shows the motion of effort without effort itself. A few interviews. A few routes checked. Then a conclusion delivered too early, too clean. Case fatigue disguised as certainty. The father was already gone. The son was everything left. When hope phrased like that, every dismissal cuts deeper. Pleas were made anyway. They always are. The lead investigator was seasoned. 20 years in uniform teaches patterns. It also teaches which patterns are inconvenient. Experience can sharpen instincts or dull conscience. Here, it did the latter. The wagon belonged to a respected man. A man with donations on plaques. A man whose name opened rooms and closed mouths. Investigating him would have been awkward. Authority often recognizes itself instantly. A shared look. A shared understanding. This is not someone we trouble. This is someone we protect from trouble. The file notes the lead, then abandons it. No follow-up. No interview. No visit. The omission is so complete it becomes deliberate. Absence used as a tool. Weeks passed. The city adjusted. Rumors replaced action. The missing became background noise. That's how neglect finishes its work. When the bodies were found, distance did the first favor. Far enough away to feel unrelated. Close enough to close the circle quietly. 2 boys. Unidentified at first. Starved. Marked. Evidence spoke clearly. Old injuries. Healing fractures. Repeated restraint. Time did not erase what happened. It carved it deeper. The same investigator took the case. Continuity presented as competence. In reality, it sealed the outcome before questions formed. Property records surfaced. The house was owned under a false name. Purchased months earlier. The paper trail existed. It always does. It was acknowledged, then neutralized. Insufficient evidence became the phrase that ended everything. A sentence that sounds reasonable until you read what was ignored. Until you see how much was avoided. The respected man was never questioned publicly. Never arrested. Never inconvenienced. He continued attending dinners. Continued funding causes. Continued being trusted. Trust is powerful camouflage. It convinces others to doubt what they see, to reinterpret facts until they fit comfort. Years later, death arrived gently for him. In bed, surrounded by the quiet dignity he curated. The system worked perfectly for exactly one person. The boys received none of that order. Their ending was chaos, cold, hunger. Their names were reduced to ink and uncertainty. The contradiction sits heavy. Evidence abundant. Action absent. This wasn't incompetence. It was alignment. Power recognizing itself and choosing continuity over truth. The photograph now reads differently. Not just a crime. A receipt. Proof that protection existed long before exposure. Men who look away are rarely empty-handed. They carry favors, debts, futures that require silence. Looking away is an investment. This chapter of the story doesn't hinge on monsters alone. It hinges on uniforms, ledgers, friendships, on the comfortable decision to do nothing. Once that decision is made, everything else follows predictably. Reports thin, files close, lives end without explanation. The photograph survived because someone refused to finish the job of forgetting. Someone hid it instead of burning it. Preservation became resistance. Now the image speaks where men did not. It points past the room, past the boys, toward a network of mutual protection, because a single man cannot disappear truth alone. That requires cooperation. And cooperation leaves patterns, shared habits, shared blind spots that repeat elsewhere, in other cities, behind other respectable doors. The photograph was never meant to stay still. It wasn't created for memory or mourning. It was produced to move, to circulate quietly among men who knew how to read it without asking questions. This wasn't sentiment. It was signal, a visual language spoken through posture, restraint, setting, the grip, the room, the silence. To the right eyes, it said access, control, credibility. Copies existed. Carbon prints were efficient then, clean, repeatable. One image becoming many without losing clarity. Proof multiplied without risk of confession. Men exchanged these things the way others exchanged favors. Not openly, never directly. Wrapped in codes, in polite correspondence, in social rituals that looked harmless from the outside. The photograph functioned like a calling card. Evidence that the room existed, that the system worked, that the man behind the lens was reliable. Networks don't form around chaos. They form around consistency, around shared rules, around the confidence that everyone present benefits from silence. Each image raised status, not by beauty, by implication. The worse the conditions, the clearer the power. Suffering became currency. This explains the care, the composition, the patience, the reason no urgency touched the shutter. The photograph needed to be legible to peers. The boys were not the audience. They never were. They were instruments in a conversation happening elsewhere, far from stone walls. That's why the grip matters so much. It wasn't accidental. It demonstrated compliance under pressure. Proof of conditioning achieved. When the photograph traveled, it carried context with it. Men who received it understood the basement without seeing the whole room. Understood the iron without touching it. Archives later revealed coded advertisements. Innocent phrasing. Odd requests. Language that passed public inspection while signaling something else entirely. This wasn't a lone operation. It never is. Lone men hide. Networks protect. They share risk, dilute guilt, normalize what should never normalize. The respected man wasn't reckless. He documented because he felt safe. Because experience taught him consequences belonged to others. The photograph eventually stopped moving. Not because the trade ended, but because one person interrupted the cycle by refusing to destroy it. A friend, a keeper of memory, someone who understood that proof matters even when justice fails. He wrote the names on the back later, not for accuracy, for humanity, to insist the boys existed beyond utility. The phrase wasn't an epitaph. It was an apology, one written too late, but written anyway. Generations carried the image like a wound wrapped carefully, hidden, never healed. Too dangerous to display, too important to erase. Time did what courts would not. It loosened seals, opened archives, allowed eyes to connect patterns once considered coincidence. When restoration finally revealed the full truth, the photograph completed its journey. From signal, to secret, to witness. The men who traded in silence lost something they relied on. Obscurity, the most effective shield they ever had. The boys gained something small but permanent. Recognition, their suffering no longer abstract. Their existence no longer negotiable. The room no longer stands alone. It belongs to a map now. One still incomplete, still uncomfortable, still expanding. This ending isn't clean. No punishment balances the scale. No sentence reaches backward through time. But the photograph did what it was never intended to do. It told on everyone. And once an image does that, it can't be put back into the dark.